Hi everybody, welcome to Aimee nOlte Music. Today's video is about how to self-produce your own album. And I am self-producing an album right now. It's going to come out really soon. So this time, because I've got a YouTube channel and because sometimes people ask me, when I started out on this process with this new album, I just decided I would document every step of it and write down notes about everything that I did. And I've come up with 22 steps for how to put out your own album. There are 22 steps to putting out your own album. Don't let anybody tell you differently. 22. Just kidding. I had 22 steps. And I know it sounds like a lot, but I think I'll kind of fly through them and not, take up too much time on any one thing. But here we go. First thing, you got to be passionate about something. You got to have some solid idea that moves you, that pushes you, and you know that it's going to carry you through the whole thing. So I wouldn't say if you just got this little idea that you should just go for it, but you got to have some time to cultivate your idea and make sure that it is really it's going to do it for you. Next thing, number 2, you have to decide about content. You have to decide about instruments, about songs, which songs are going to be on your album, how many songs, how many musicians are you going to hire, all these kinds of things. You have to arrange your songs or hire somebody to arrange for you. So if you're going to do some collaborations, you have to think about that. So it's basically thinking about musicians, arrangements, songs, all of the meat of the album. Are they going to be originals? Are they going to be standards? Are they going to be covers of pop tunes? All these things you got to think about. The next thing I've got, number 3, is what's your budget? That's a big one because the kind of album that you put out has a lot to do with how much money you can afford to spend on it. So if you've got some big ideas about what you want to do, like maybe you want to hire a string quartet or maybe a big band or horn section, or these are super important things to think about because you have to pay money to every one of those people. There are other things later on that you'll need to consider your budget for: CDs, vinyl, promotion, tours, merchandise. We'll talk about that stuff later. But first, you need to think about the people that you immediately need to hire to make your album. What you pay your musicians kind of depends. It can depend on how close of friends you are with them and if they've ever asked you to do any work for free. Sometimes you can get a payback. But I tend to never do that kind of a thing. I think that as long as I'm going to hire somebody, no matter how good of friends we are, if I'm asking them to spend a day or two in the studio, I'm going to pay them $100 an hour. It's kind of the going rate. Usually I don't tell my musicians what I'm going to pay them because I guess they know me and they don't ask. But when the day is over, they've all got some, $100 per hour a piece in their PayPal. It's a good chunk of change right off the bat. Depending on where you live, that could change. If you live in a more rural area, people might be happy to do it for $50 an hour, $75 an hour, depending on their experience. These are pros. When you hire pros, I think $100 an hour is kind of the going rate. Don't forget that if you need help with your budget, there are Kickstarter and GoFundMe and Bandcamp kind of projects where people can donate to help you make your album. So many people do this, and it's such a good idea. Number 3, choose a place to record. You've got to choose a studio, and you've got to choose your engineer. To me, the most important thing, well, aside from the piano, is that engineer. And making sure that they are somebody that you click with, that kind of gets you and that is going to respect your decisions and also be able to add to your creative process through the whole thing, because it's a long kind of front and center kind of relationship that you have with this engineer. Not only are you going to have to spend countless hours with him or her in their studio, but even after all the recording's done, there's countless exchanges between you and them, phone calls and emails and texts, and we'll get into that later, but you really need somebody that you get along with. And the studio needs to be the kind of studio that's right for you. Sometimes you're going to need some isolation booths. Sometimes you might need one big room. You want to see what kinds of microphones they have, what kind of equipment is everywhere. Sometimes you might get a studio that actually does some video, which I did last time, and it was really helpful for me. The best way to pick your studio if you're starting out is to just ask people who have done it in your area. Ask them what they like about this or that engineer and this or that studio. And I picked my last studio, Ming Dynasty Studios, run by Tom Zink, just based on my friend Jeremy Siskin's recommendation. He said, Aimee, you'll love him. You'll love the studio, you'll love the piano, this is the place for you. And I know Jeremy well enough that I could trust him on that. That was number 4. Number 5 is you need to hire a graphic designer and think about your album artwork. This is something that's always a little bit like out of my wheelhouse, but I've been lucky to have ideas about album artwork and, some kind of idea that goes along with the whole idea of the album. But it's something that I always ask people for help on. I ask my family, my close friends, my artist friends. I just kind of bounce ideas off of them and see what they think. I like to get a lot of outside help when I'm thinking about visual art because, it's not my bag. But hiring a good graphic design artist is helpful. And it's not absolutely necessary. You can find, like my son, for example, does a lot of my graphic design work for me, but he doesn't have, he could probably get them pretty quick, but he doesn't have the skills to work within the template that you need to distribute your artwork to the digital distribution companies and that you need to turn into your printing companies, like your CD or vinyl printing companies. I think there's some skills that just, the average Joe who is a good photographer probably wouldn't be able to handle. But maybe if they're smart and they do a little, research. But I've had a good graphic designer or two help me with this part of my album. You also need to think about actually shooting the artwork or having the artwork drawn or made. That's all part of it, but needs to happen starting right at the beginning, I think. Number 6, you need to choose an approximate release date. Sometimes the release date can change due to unforeseen circumstances or advice you get from other people. Like your promoter might have an idea of when you should release, if you hire a promoter. We'll talk about that in a second. But an idea of your timeline will help you know how much time you've got to record, how much time you've got to mix, when you're going to need to have the masters finished, when you turn in your artwork, all of these things. Just a little, I think, 6 months is doable. I've done it faster, I've done it slower, but 6 months can kind of be a pretty good window of time for you to accomplish all of these things, I think, if you're doing it yourself. Step number 7 is prepare to record. This is one of the most important steps that there is. You have to think about every single song, and you have to think about every part of every song in total detail. You have to think about if you want to separate musicians and have all of you, listening to each other with headphones in different rooms so that everybody's completely isolated, or if you want kind of a group vibe where everybody's looking at each other and feeling everything right in the moment. You have to think about, am I taking a solo on this song? Is my guitar player taking a solo? What's the order of the solos? You have to think about the groove that your drummer lays down and your bass player, every tiny little detail. And I'm not just talking about playing details either. You have to think about how your musicians are going to respond to the new environment that you've created for them. And you've got to give them a little time to get in there and get used to it, and because they'll all have their own ideas about how setup should go too. So setup takes some time, and you've got to pay your engineer for setup time also. Sometimes my guitar player will say something like, I'd like a mix of a direct sound and also a mic close to the strings. We do that on Where or When coming up on my album, and it's an amazing sound. And it was the guitar player's idea. So sometimes your musicians are going to say, hey, I don't hear the overhead cymbal in my left ear like I'd like to. Can we move the mic closer? Can we try a different mic? There are all kinds of things that are going to be involved in your setup that you just need to think about before you get there. You can ask your musicians before they come in, how do you typically like to set up? And then you can tell your engineer that, just so that they have a little bit of an idea of what's coming. You need to make sure and write very detailed instructions for your musicians in your music. At bar 32, we slow down. There's a fermata. You're going to have to look at me because I'm going to count you back in. Everybody, James isn't going to be able to see me. He's over there in that booth. All right, James, can you see my arm right now? Okay, you can see my arm. Cool. I'm going to stick my arm out. I'm going to count us in. You'll see it. Bar 32. It's nothing. Okay, good. You see my arm. The rest of you can see my mouth. Great. That's how we'll know what tempo to come back in at. Sometimes you can't even see each other, and you've got to think about how are we going to get cues that we would normally get visually. There are all kinds of crazy things, but if you take that extra time to just sit and make notes about every song, so whatever song you're going to record, write down your song title and write down everything you think of about that song. I even write, Aimee, don't overplay on this song, or Aimee, burn on this song. This is the song where you want to show your stuff. Little kinds of notes to yourself. And you can say, oh, Aimee, remind Mike that he needs to play single lines and not comp while you're comping for yourself to sing the melody. Even that kind of stuff, you have to say, oh, bass player, there's a 2 feel starting at bar 16. We're going to hold that. Every tiny little teeny thing, especially if you haven't played these arrangements with your musicians before. If you guys have been playing them for years and years, you're set. Like, you don't really need to do that, except for things like visual cues and setups. But I'm just asking you, think through every little detail before you get to the studio so that you don't have to go, oh my gosh, when you're in the studio and say, I don't know, I got to think about this, because you're wasting time. Time is money in the studio. You're paying by the hour. And so you want to have everything already set before you get there. I think this is like the most important step. Number 8 is to consider making a video. If you can do it in the studio, it's a really good idea to take some video. If you can hire somebody to do this for you, or if you've got a friend who will help out, that would be great. I've actually never had that. But doing it yourself on the studio day can be very overwhelming, and it can ruin things, actually. I found that I can't think about the video myself. If I do, it's like too many hats to wear. So if you can figure out a way to get somebody else to shoot your live videos in the studio, if you want to have some, I think that's a really good idea. You need to budget for that too. Step number 9 is to just record. Prepare yourself, stay healthy, drink lots of water, bring some snacks. You can bring some snacks for your musicians. I usually do that too. Get lots of sleep. Just be prepared to be fully mentally going for several hours and maybe a couple of days. It's exhausting work, and when you're done, you're probably going to need to drive to In-N-Out and get yourself a big combo and a milkshake or something, because you'll deserve it after that much time in the studio. It's crazy taxing work, but also it's the most fun. It's my favorite step, being in the studio and hearing things come together. So fun. After you've recorded and paid everybody, you got to give it a week, 2 weeks, depends on how busy your engineer is, but your engineer will send you mixes, rough mixes of every song. You got to take some time with these. This is going to be probably where you spend the most time in your album making process, is listening to mixes. And every time you listen, I would recommend being extremely focused. You can listen in different ways. You've got to listen sometimes through your Apple earbuds or your AirPods. You've got to listen through your nice stereo, your headphones. You can listen through your system in your house, through some speakers, through some monitors. You can listen in your car. You can listen through your iPhone speaker, because you have to remember that everybody in the world is going to listen to this in a different way, and you want it to sound good for everybody. The first thing I like to do is just decide if anybody needs to come back into the studio and re-record anything. Sometimes that needs to happen. All kinds of reasons. And it might be you. You might need to come back in. But that's the first thing I do, is I start writing, here's the name of this song. I'm going to have to bring the bass player back in. Or your engineer can fix things sometimes. If the bass player plays a wrong note, or they forgot to rest where they were supposed to rest, a lot of times your engineer can cut that stuff out. It can actually change the pitch on a note to fix things. So before you decide to bring your musician back in, you should ask your engineer if they can fix the thing that you hear that's wrong. Also, on a first pass, I try to listen to things like if the piano bench is creaking or if there's any kind of weird sound happening. That'll be a thing that will sometimes determine whether or not your musicians need to come back in. I've had times before when there's a hiss on the guitar and there's just no way to get rid of it and the guitar has to come back in and record that track or something. But listen for weird things that need to be fixed right up front that can't be fixed later. At this point, your engineer is going to have to make a lot of decisions. They're going to have to decide on the brightness of the tone of all the instruments, on the way that your vocals sound, how you want things panned, all kinds of things like this. And the best way, I think, to tell an engineer about the overall sound of your album is to find a couple of albums that you love. I do this all the time. I'll hear the way that, horns are panned and drums are panned and piano, the way that some things seem a little more front and center, the way that vocals are warm or the reverb. I'll say, I really like, this Diana Krall album, and I like the way the piano sounds here, but I like the way the drums are panned in this album, Sonny Rollins. I really like, I just give my engineer just 2 or 3 usually albums where I say, I like how this sounds, and that gives them an idea. Because I don't know how to talk about the sound as well as they do, but if they could just have something that they listen to. I remember my first album, I had a Chick Corea album that I loved, and I loved the way the piano sounded on it, and I just gave that to the engineer, and I said, if you could make the piano sound like this, that would be right for me. Step number 12, fix things that need to be fixed in person. Go back into the studio, get them done. Sometimes there's a little downtime during this, so my number 13 is to think about things that will come later or things that you need to really be thinking about now, like whether or not you're going to hire a promoter for press, a promoter for radio, if you're going to print CDs and vinyl, and how many, and touring, and release concerts. There are all kinds of details that are coming up that need some attention starting now. So in this downtime, when you're waiting for your engineer to come back with a mix for you, I would recommend start thinking about these things. 14 is to listen to the mixes again and again and again until everything is exactly the way that you want it. You can try different ideas, but I've got folder after folder in my Dropbox where the engineer sends, all right, here's version number 2 of everything, or even just version number 2 of track number 3. What do you think of this? And then I listen to it, and I get the musicians to listen to it too. I'll send them all links to the Dropbox and ask them if they've got time to give a little bit of feedback. And they want to sound good, so they'll always give feedback, and it's always helpful. They can say things that I might not have thought of, like, oh, I would like it if the bass sound were a little more full, or I feel like the bass needs to be a little bit hotter in the mix, a little louder. All kinds of things. The drummer will say, I feel like this song's too cymbal heavy, I need more snare, or I don't hear the bass drum the way I'd like to. All these kinds of things you might need advice about from your musicians. Be picky. And if you've got people in your life that are close to you, let them listen too. John has ideas when he listens, my husband, when he listens to my tracks, sometimes he'll have ideas that I never even thought of, and it ends up being really helpful in the end. But you want to listen. This is the time where you have to do extremely detailed listening. So what I do is I lock myself in a room in the dark with my headphones on, and I'll listen to every track only listening to drums. And I'll make notes. Everything about only drums for the whole album. I'll go back, I'll listen to bass. Every track, I'm only listening to the bass. Next instrument. And it takes hours and hours and hours. But unless I'm super focused about every instrument like that, I'm always going to wonder if something could have been a little bit better. Now, sometimes you have to decide that you're okay with mistakes. And that's cool. And especially as part of jazz. You got to be okay with the mistakes because we don't want to have everything just perfect. At least I don't. I want people to know that there's some element of, We're real humans playing together in the moment and improvising especially. So I do allow room for mistakes. If I play a note on the piano that I think was a little bit of a clunker, I might not fix it just because it was true to the moment. And all my great heroes have done that, and even famous records. Sometimes you just have to let a mistake go. Sometimes mistakes can become beautiful to you after you've lived with them a while too. Next step is mastering. A lot of times your engineer will master for you if you want. You pay them a little extra. They'll make all of your tracks sound uniform so that they're all at the same volume, that they sound good on, like I said, different speakers and headphones, and they've got some kind of uniform reverb and uniform levels and compression. All of this is done in mastering, and you can spend $1,000, $2,000 hiring somebody to professionally master for you. I know the digital distribution companies like CD Baby and I think DistroKid also have mastering services that they'll throw in for you. That seems a little, I don't know how that would be, but I've usually had my engineers master for me. Things can sound completely different after they're mastered too. Sometimes you really like a version of a mix, and after you hear it mastered, you go, oh no, everything changed. So you got to listen again to all of the masters and make sure that they match what you thought was the right sound. That's step number 16. Listen to the masters, all of your tracks that have been mastered. You should also listen to the masters and decide, that everything sounds good. Number 16, that's what that is. Number 17 is to start your digital distribution process. You've got to choose a company. I always choose CD Baby. DistroKid is the other one that a lot of people use, and I might use them in the future too because I've heard really good things. But a company that all you have to do is upload your stuff. You upload your songs, you upload your artwork, you have to write a bio, you have to say who you sound like. You have to say what your genre is, what your subgenre is, what's your mood. They'll ask you all kinds of things so that they know how to send your digital information to all of these companies like iTunes and Amazon and Google Play and Spotify and Pandora and every platform. So this takes a little bit of time, not too much, but it's some time. So you got to plan a little bit of time to upload everything to your digital distributor. You also have to decide how you want to make money from your digital distribution. There's an option that you can click that says send my songs to every single platform out there. I don't care if I get paid or not. I just want my music out there. I've never done that. But there's another option that says I want everything that pays, even no matter how little it pays, I still want to do that. So even if it pays you, fraction of a penny on the stream, you might want it as long as it pays something. You can also go through and de-click certain platforms. Like if you don't want your stuff on Deezer or Napster or YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, these are other platforms that you can consider because you can pretty much tell your digital distributor that you want to make money every time somebody plays your cut on YouTube, or like I do, you can tell them that you do not want this to happen. Just, it's a little secret, but now it's not. I don't click YouTube because I know that I'm going to be using my songs on YouTube, and it's a little bit of a hassle even to get your own license to play your own stuff on YouTube. Learned that the hard way. And I don't care. If somebody wants to use my work on YouTube, I say go for it, just because that's my platform, and I love to be able to share music on YouTube when it's not copyrighted and I don't have to worry about that. And I just want that to be for anybody who wants to use my songs ever on YouTube. Hopefully they just do it in a cool way. But I think, exposure is good. Facebook is crazy. Facebook will detect any amount of any song you ever put on there. They're even better than YouTube. You can't even get by with a tiny clip. So I also don't click Facebook. I don't care if I make money from my music being played on Facebook. Yeah. You also need to update your website right now. You need to make a place on your website where people can go to maybe listen to clips of every song, maybe read lyrics of every song. I've got one on my website. It's /recordings, AimeeNOlte.com/recordings. And you can go and listen to every single album that I've made and tracks from every album. You can read the reviews that have come from. You just need to think about setting that up a little bit. You need to think about having a place on your website where people can buy your music and get introduced to your music too. It's also probably the time to this is where you'll set your actual release date. You need to think about pre-release if you want to do a pre-release on iTunes and Amazon and everything, because sometimes that's how my last album was able to chart. It debuted as #1 just because of the pre-release sales that I had before the actual drop date. There are all kinds of articles you can read online about choosing a release date for your album and whether to do pre-release or not. Number 18, you need to take all of the mastered files that you have and put them in a couple of places. You need to make a Dropbox folder that you can share with people, and also a SoundCloud playlist, so that when you send your album off to be listened to by reviewers or by a potential promoter, they've got a way to be able to listen for free. Of course, you make these links private, so only the people that you send them to can see them and hear them, and not everybody else. Number 19 is you need to write about yourself and you need to write about your album. You need to have a long bio. You need to have a short bio. You need to have a description of your album and what it feels like. You need to make the audience know what they're going to feel when they listen to your album and why they should listen to it in the first place. You don't want to be too lengthy, but you're going to have to put these things on your website and also in your digital distribution. If you need to hire somebody to write for you, that's where the next step actually comes in. But you can do that. That's number 20. You need to think about if you want to hire a promoter for radio or a promoter for press. This is pricey. It's going to cost you probably at least $2,000 for each of these things. So you need to decide if it's worth it to you. There are ways to send your own stuff into the radio and send your own stuff out to the writers of publications, the journalists, but it's hard, and it's harder especially if they don't know who you are. And if you're dealing with a promoter, they already know the promoter. The promoter has relationships with all of these different publications, both in print and online, and also the radio people. They have relationships. That's a lot of what the music business is. So your promoter can get you heard. Also, you need somebody to write your press release, and sometimes promoters provide this in their package. Somebody to write like what goes out about your album to everybody that you send your album to. And when your promoter sends out your album, they'll probably do it in two ways. They'll probably need actual physical CDs to mail to people. The last time I hired a promoter, she sent 80 CDs out to people, to Downbeat, to Jazziz, to Jazz Weekly, everybody that, you want her to send one to. And then she also sent an additional 150, I think, links of that SoundCloud or Dropbox folder to other writers that prefer to receive their information digitally. The promoter will know that too. I've never paid somebody to promote on radio. I just haven't. But there is a really cool service called Play MPE that will charge you, I think, $150 to send your SoundCloud link or your Dropbox link out to hundreds of online radio stations throughout the world. And then there's a way to keep track of who plays you, and you can see that. It's a really good option if you don't want to pay for radio. Play MPE. Step number 21, we're almost there, is to market yourself. After your album comes out, well, then right before your album comes out, it's time to start telling people about it. And there's no rule about this. We live in a brand new world as far as this is concerned. Everybody can market themselves much more than they were able to in the past. You've got all the platforms, Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, and you can make content in any way that you want to promote yourself. Think outside the box when you're marketing yourself. You can learn from other people. You can see how other artists have put their stuff out there. You can see, when's the first time that they let anybody see their album art? Looks like it was about 2 weeks before the album came out. Or when's the first time that a review came out? Or that the artist actually chose to say, hey, reviews are coming out about my album. It's going to come out on May 30th. You can kind of see timeline ideas from other artists that you respect online. You can also see how some people make quirky videos where they dress up or they be silly and they tell you their album's coming. Or, you know, some people go live and they play a live concert of all the tracks that are going to be on their album, but they do it solo. You've got to market yourself. And if you don't continually market yourself, people are going to forget about your album. You're trying to get plays. You're trying to get plays on iTunes, plays on Spotify. Your work doesn't even show up as meaning much at all until after you have 1,000 plays on Spotify. So you got to keep pushing and keep reminding people. Listen to my album. You give them little clips of things here and there, especially if you haven't turned on the monetize button on YouTube and Facebook. You can make clips of your songs. You can show your artwork and have a video playing behind it. Say, look, here's my drummer's solo, or here's where we traded fours on this song. Every day, you pretty much have to think of a little something to do to continually market yourself. You can also place paid ads on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. These ads are tricky, and I'm not the one to talk about it, really, but I find that a $20 ad focused on your friends and your friends of friends is about the best way that I've found to market on Facebook or Instagram if you're going to pay for an ad. Don't go selecting crazy countries everywhere all over the world and be like, oh, it would be rad if my music was heard in the Congo. I'm going to play the Congo. Like, I've done that before, where I choose a ton of countries where I want Facebook to promote and make people see my ad in their Facebook feed. Don't do that. What'll happen is you'll end up with, Facebook will say, oh, she clicked, I don't know, Kyrgyzstan. And then you'll end up with all of the likes on your ad being only people from Kyrgyzstan. I don't know why Facebook does that, but they do that. So I like to just click my friends and friends of friends when you choose who to promote to in these targeted Facebook or Instagram ads. Step number 22, take a little break. You earned it. Putting out an album is a ton of work, as you can see. I say take a little break. Give yourself time to be open and reflect on who you are as a musician, as a person, and start to think about what your next project's going to be. Sometimes if it's your first album in a while, it can be really advisable to put out another album within a year, just so that you're fresh out there and everybody remembers you after they've forgotten a little bit. You're right back in there with another thing. Yeah, time to start thinking about a new project. I hope everything was helpful. It's a lot of steps, isn't it? If you have comments that could help other people, if you've done this yourself and you found some things that I have skipped, why don't you put them in the comments so that we can all learn from each other? That's what this is about. If you have to do this yourself and you don't have a label to be the one to make all of these decisions and do all of this stuff for you, it's on you. But you got it. One step at a time. I try not to think about the whole thing as a whole, but just to go step by step, methodically and carefully, and try to remain chill through the whole thing. Baby steps, you know. That's why I broke it up into these 22 steps, so that, you know, you just have a handle on what to do next. And one step at a time, you're going to make it. You're going to make your album. You'll make something beautiful for the world, and that's what really counts. All right, everybody, I'll see you next time on Aimee nOlte Music. Don't forget to subscribe.